For most men who enter Angola prison, freedom is not a date on a calendar. It is not a promise. It is not something they plan for. At Angola, time does not move toward release. It moves toward death. This prison, once a plantation and still surrounded by razor wire and open fields, holds thousands of men who were told, in one form or another, you will never leave this place. Life without parole is not an exception here. It is the norm. Generations have lived and died inside these fences, buried just yards from the cells where they spent their final nights. That's why release from Angola is not celebrated loudly. There are no cheers, no countdowns, no victory speeches. Because when freedom does come, it comes quietly, almost like a mistake. In this story, the last 24 hours do not begin with excitement. They begin with disbelief. The man at the center of this moment has woken up in the same cell for decades. He knows the sound by heart, the metal doors, the distant voices, the slow rhythm of count. He has lived long enough inside Angola to watch younger inmates grow old, to watch officers retire, to watch the world outside change without him. And now, suddenly, the routine breaks. A name is called. Paperwork appears. A guard says words that almost sound unreal. Pack your property. At Angola, those words are dangerous to believe, because men here have learned not to hope. Hope has broken too many people before. Some inmates who were once told they were going home never did. Appeals failed. Promises vanished. Years added themselves back onto sentences. So during the final night, there is no sleep. There is only waiting. Waiting through the last count. Waiting through the last meal. Waiting through the final walk across the tier, knowing this might be the last time these concrete walls will ever be seen. Outside the cell, the prison does not change. The gates still stand. The fences still stretch for miles. The graveyard is still there, filled with men who never got this moment. Inside the cell, everything feels heavier. What do you do with your final hours in a place that defined your entire adult life? What do you think about when the world you feared forgetting is suddenly waiting for you again? For some, freedom is joyful. For others, it is terrifying. And for a man leaving Angola, the last 24 hours are not just about walking out. They are about surviving the final stretch inside a prison that was never meant to let him go. This is not a story about celebration. This is a story about transition, about closure, and about what happens when a place built to hold you forever finally opens its gate. Before we dive in, hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe to HFD Chive Crimes. Every bit of support helps us reveal the hidden truths behind the world's prisons and crime documentaries. Now, let's go inside. For most prisons in the United States, release is expected. Sentences have end dates. Calendars matter. Time moves forward with a purpose. But Angola prison was never designed around that idea. Angola is not just a prison. It is a destination where sentences are meant to end lives, not confinement. Officially known as the Louisiana State Penitentiary, Angola sits on more than 18,000 acres of land, surrounded on three sides by the Mississippi River. Its isolation is intentional. There are no nearby cities, no easy access points, no sense that the outside world is close. From the moment inmates arrive, they understand something immediately. This place is meant to keep people forever. More than 2/3 of the men incarcerated in Angola are serving life sentences. Many of them were told at sentencing that parole would never be an option. Decades passed without hearings, without reviews, without any realistic expectation of release. Inside Angola, life without parole is not a rare punishment reserved for the worst cases. It is a foundation of the prison population. This reality shapes everything about daily life. Inmates do not talk about when they get out. Instead, they talk about survival, routine, and endurance. Jobs are chosen not to build resumes, but to make time pass more easily. Friendships are formed with quiet understanding that one of them will eventually die inside these fences. Angola's reputation was not built overnight. For much of its history, violence, forced labor, and neglect defined the prison. It was once called the bloodiest prison in America. Although conditions have changed over the years, the sentence structure has not. The message remains clear. Angola is where Louisiana sends men it does not expect to ever see again. That is why release feels almost unnatural here. When a man at Angola is told he may be leaving, disbelief is the first reaction. Not joy, not relief. Disbelief, because hope has been punished inside this prison for generations. Appeals fail. Clemency requests disappear into bureaucracy. Promises made in courtrooms decades earlier fade into silence. Most men who enter Angola will age, decline, and die within its boundaries. There's a prison cemetery on the grounds, filled with men who never made it to freedom. Every inmate knows it exists. Every inmate knows what it represents. So when release does happen, through overturned convictions, rare parole changes, or executive clemency, it disrupts a system built on permanence. Officers double-check paperwork. Administrators move carefully. And the inmate himself learns not to believe anything until the gate actually opens. This is why the final 24 hours inside Angola are so heavy. They are not just the end of a sentence. They are the collapse of an identity built over decades. Because at Angola, leaving is not the normal outcome. It is the exception. Inside Angola Prison, news does not travel the way it does on the outside. There are no announcements over loudspeakers, no official letters slid under cell doors announcing freedom. Information moves slowly, quietly, and often indirectly. That is intentional. At a prison built around permanence, sudden hope is treated as a dangerous thing. For most inmates, the first sign that something is different comes from a routine that breaks. A guard lingers longer than usual. A supervisor appears unexpectedly on the tier. A name is called during count, followed by a short instruction that feels deliberately vague. Pack your property. No explanation. No celebration. Just words that echo in a place where they almost never mean release. At Angola, inmates are trained by experience not to react. Too many men have watched hope turn into humiliation. Paperwork errors, last-minute reversals, or delayed approvals have crushed expectations before. So when the possibility of release appears, the instinct is restraint. Believe nothing until the gate opens. The inmate begins packing anyway, slowly and carefully. Decades of life have been reduced to a few personal items. Letters folded thin from rereading. Photos yellowed by time. Legal paperwork that once carried hope and now feels heavy. Every item carries memory. Every decision about what to keep feels final. Around him, other inmates notice. They do not ask questions. They already understand what this moment means and how fragile it is. Some offer quiet nods of respect. Others look away. At Angola, a release reminds everyone else of what they are not getting. Administratively, the prison moves with caution. Release from Angola triggers multiple verification steps. Sentencing documents are reviewed again. Identification is checked. Property lists are matched. No one wants a mistake. Not in a place where freedom is so rare it feels unnatural. As night approaches, the weight of reality sets in. This could be the last count, the last lockdown, the last time the lights dim in a cell that has held a man longer than many outside relationships last. Yet the fear remains that something could still go wrong. Sleep rarely comes. Instead, the inmate lies awake listening to familiar sound of the prison. Doors clanging, footsteps echoing, distant voices fading into silence. Sound he has memorized over decades. Sound that once meant safety, routine, and survival now feel like they might finally be ending. There is no celebration inside the cell, only reflection. Thoughts drip between past and future. Crimes committed, time lost, people gone. Outside the walls, a world waits that no longer resembles the one he entered as a younger man. Inside Angola, the night stretches on. The final hours pass slowly, deliberately, as if the prison itself is reluctant to let go. Because at Angola, even when freedom is approved, it is never rushed. Night falls slowly at Angola Prison, and on this night, time feels heavier than ever. The routine does not change for the man preparing to leave. That is part of the design. Even on the edge of freedom, the prison insists on sameness. Count is called. Doors are checked. The system refuses to acknowledge that anything unusual is happening. For the inmate, this may be the last time his name is answered from inside these walls. The last time he stands for count in a place that is defined as adult life. He responds the same way he always has, steady and controlled, because Angola does not reward emotion. Inside this prison, showing too much can be dangerous. The final meal arrives without ceremony. It is not special. There is no acknowledgement that this could be the last tray slid through the slot. The food tastes the same as it always has, but the meaning is different. Some inmates eat slowly, try to remember every detail. Others cannot eat at all. Their stomachs are tight with anxiety, not excitement. This is the moment when fear often overtakes joy. Freedom sounds good in theory, but the outside world has become unfamiliar. Many men released from Angola entered prison decades earlier. Technology, language, and social rules have all changed. Inside these walls, life is controlled, predictable, and harsh, but it was known. Outside is uncertain. The cell feels smaller during the final night. Every mark on the wall, every sound from the tier, carries memory. This is where arguments happened, where letters were read, where grief was processed in silence. Leaving means abandoning a version of life that, for better or worse, became normal. Lights dim. The prison settles into its nighttime rhythm. But sleep does not come easily. The inmate listens as officers make rounds, their footsteps echoing in the corridor. Each pass could be the last one heard from inside this cell. Thoughts return to the gate, to paperwork, to the possibility that something could still change. At Angola, nothing is final until it's final. Men have learned not to trust hope. So the night becomes a test of patience, endurance, and restraint. By morning, everything will change, or nothing will. Morning arrives quietly at Angola Prison, the same way it always does. There is no announcement, no acknowledgement that this day is different. The lights come on. Count is called. The prison continues as if nothing extraordinary is about to happen. But for the inmate preparing to leave, this morning feels unreal. A guard stops at the cell and gives a short instruction. Step out, bring your property. The tone is neutral, professional, almost distant. At Angola, emotion is never part of the process. Freedom is handled the same way as discipline, calmly, carefully, and without commentary. The walk through the corridor feels longer than usual. These hallways have been crossed thousands of times before, to jobs, to meals, to medical appointments. But this time, the direction is different. Every step carries weight. Other inmates watch silently from behind bars, understanding exactly what this moment represents. No one speaks. Respect in Angola is quiet. Processing begins immediately. Identification is verified again. Paperwork is reviewed line by line. Officers confirm names, numbers, and signatures that have already been checked multiple times. In a prison where release is rare, mistakes are not acceptable. The system moves slowly on purpose. Personal property is returned piece by piece. Items that once felt insignificant now feel symbolic. Worn shoes, folded letters, legal documents that once represented hope. Some things no longer fit. Others no longer matter. Everything that defined decades of confinement must now fit into a small bag. Then comes the final search. Even on the way out, the rules apply. The inmate stands still, compliant, knowing this is the last time he will go through a process that once defined his daily existence. There is no resentment left, only focus. As the final signatures are placed on paper, reality begins to settle in. This is actually happening. Not a rumor, not a mistake, not a delayed promise. The system is moving forward, and it is not stopping. The escort begins toward the front of the prison, toward the gate. The fields stretch wide outside the buildings, unchanged, silent witnesses to decades of confinement. The fence line comes into view. The gate stands ahead, the same gate thousands enter through, but only a handful ever leave through. There is no crowd, no speech, no dramatic moment, just a pause, one final confirmation, one final look back, and then the gate opens. The gate closes behind him, and for the first time in decades, Angola Prison is no longer in front of him. There is no dramatic moment, no rush of celebration, no sense of instant relief. What comes first is silence, a silence that feels unfamiliar after years of metal doors, shouted counts, and constant movement. The world outside does not announce itself. It simply waits. For men released from Angola, Freedom often feels overwhelming rather than joyful. Many enter the prison as young adults and are leaving as elderly men. The world they remember no longer exists. Roads feel wider. Sounds feel louder. Time moves faster than expected. Even standing without permission feels strange. The body reacts before the mind does. Hands that were once trained to stay visible now hang awkwardly at the sides. Eyes search for rules are no longer there. Every step forward carries a quiet fear of doing something wrong. A fear learned through decades of discipline and control. There is often no family waiting at the gate. Some relationships did not survive the years. Others faded quietly with time. Many inmates leave Angola with nothing more than paperwork, a small amount of release money, and instructions on where to go next. Freedom, in this moment, is not comfort. It is responsibility. Emotion arrives slowly. Guilt over the past. Grief for time lost. Anxiety about a future that feels uncertain. The outside world expects gratitude, happiness, and closure. But Angola teaches men to suppress emotion in order to survive. Releasing that control does not happen instantly. What follows is not an ending, but beginning that few are prepared for. Learning how to make decisions again. Learning how to exist without orders. Learning how to sleep without steel doors between you and the world. For many, the psychological impact of leaving Angola is heavier than the physical confinement ever was. Some former inmates later admit that the final day inside was easier than the first day outside, because inside Angola, life was defined. Outside, everything is open and terrifying. As the prison disappears from view, the weight of what has been survived begins to settle in. A place built to hold men until death has, against all expectations, let one go. And that is what makes the last 24 hours inside Angola so powerful. Not because they end with celebration, but because they mark the moment when survival finally gives way to uncertainty, and a life once frozen in time is forced to move forward again. Leaving Angola prison does not end the sentence. It changes it. In the days that follow release, freedom arrives in fragments. Simple choices feel heavy: what to wear, where to sit, when to sleep. Inside prison, every hour was scheduled. Outside, time stretches without instruction. For men who spend decades inside Angola, this absence of structure can feel disorienting, even frightening. The first nights are often the hardest. Silence replaces the familiar noise of a tear. There is no count, no light snapping on, no footsteps in the corridor. Sleep comes in short bursts, interrupted by habits the body hasn't learned to release. Some wake in panic, reaching for walls that are no longer there. Practical obstacles appear quickly. Technology feels foreign. Phones, bank cards, and basic digital tasks create anxiety. Many released inmates rely on volunteers, faith groups, or reentry programs just to navigate daily life. Without that support, freedom can feel like isolation of a different kind. Emotion surfaces slowly. Grief for years lost. Regret for choices made. Guilt for those left behind. Men who watched the gate close knowing it would never open for them. Survivors of long-term incarceration often carry a quiet burden. Why did I leave when others didn't? Public expectations rarely match reality. Society imagines release as joy, closure, redemption. But Angola taught restraint, silence, and caution. Relearning trust in people and institutions, even in oneself, takes time. Some former inmates admit they missed the certainty of prison life, not because it was good, but because it was predictable. And yet, small moments matter. Choosing when to eat, standing under an open sky, hearing ordinary sounds without consequence. These are victories that don't make headlines, but they reshape a life. Leaving Angola is not a finish line. It is a beginning of learning how to live again, slowly, imperfectly, and without guarantees. For every man who walks out of Angola prison, thousands remain behind. This is a reality that shadows every rare release. Angola is not defined by freedom. It is defined by permanence. The vast majority of inmates here will never experience a final morning, a walk to the gate, or a first night outside. Their last day will not be a release day. It will be their last day alive. Inside the prison, everyone knows this. Inmates speak about it quietly, sometimes indirectly, They talk about riding it out or finishing here. New arrivals learn quickly that Angola is not a place you plan to leave. It is a place you learn how to endure. Many of the men who remain have already outlived their families. Parents die. Siblings disappear. Children grow into strangers. Over time, the outside world becomes something they remember rather than something they belong to. Angola becomes permanent not just physically, but emotionally. The prison cemetery sits on the grounds as a constant reminder. It is not hidden. It is visible proof of what most sentences here lead to. Rows of simple markers represent men whose stories ended inside the same fences where they began. Every inmate knows it exists. Every inmate understands what it means. This knowledge shapes relationships inside. When someone is released, reactions are complicated. There is respect, sometimes quiet happiness, but also grief, because every release reminds those left behind that their own fate is different, that the gate opening for one man does not mean it will ever open for them. Some inmates stop allowing themselves to imagine freedom at all. Hope, when it fails too many times, becomes dangerous. It can break people faster than confinement. So men build lives inside Angola instead. Routines, responsibilities, roles that make time survivable. Not because they want to stay, but because surviving mentally requires acceptance. For those who do leave, this knowledge never disappears. Many former inmates say the hardest part of freedom is remembering who didn't get it. Faces that remain behind bars. Voices that will never echo outside the fence. Angola does not let go of people easily, even when it does. That is why the last 24 hours matter so much. Not because they are dramatic, but because they are rare. They stand in contrast to a system designed for endings that never involve freedom. And as the gate closes behind one man, it remains firmly shut for countless others. To understand why a release from Angola prison feels so unnatural, you have to look beyond the walls and into what this prison represents in the American justice system. Angola is not simply a correctional facility. It is a statement. It represents the farthest edge of punishment, the point where society decides that time no longer needs an ending. In most prisons, the system is built around movement. Sentences begin and end. Parole hearings are scheduled. Rehabilitation, at least in theory, has a purpose tied to release. Angola operates on a different philosophy. Here, life sentences are not symbolic or conditional. They are literal. The expectation is not reintegration, but containment until death. This philosophy shapes every aspect of the institution. Programs exist, but they are designed to manage behavior and maintain order, not to prepare inmates for a future outside the fence. Education classes, work details, and faith-based programs help men survive mentally and physically, but they do not come with the promise of freedom. At Angola, improvement does not equal release. Good behavior does not shorten time. Time itself becomes irrelevant. The prison's physical isolation reinforces this message. Surrounded by farmland and bordered by the Mississippi River, Angola feels cut off from modern life. That separation is intentional. The prison functions as a place where society can send men it does not want to think about again. Distance creates invisibility, and invisibility makes permanence easier to accept. Angola also exposes a deeper truth about life without parole in America. These sentences remove hope as a structural element of incarceration. For some, this is seen as justice, a response to crimes deemed unforgivable. For others, it raises questions about accountability, redemption, and human change over time. Inside Angola, those debates are abstract. What matters is a lived reality, decades passing without the possibility of release. This is why a rare release from Angola feels disruptive. It challenges the certainty the system depends on. Each man who leaves forces a reconsideration of what forever really means. Was the original sentence wrong? Did the system change? Or did time reveal something the courtroom could not? For the prison administration, releases are handled cautiously, almost reluctantly. They are exceptions that must not undermine the rule. For inmates, they are reminders that even the most final punishment is not entirely immune to error or mercy. Angola stands as a symbol of how the American prison system defines its limits, where punishment stops being about correction and becomes about removal. And every time the gate opens, even briefly, it raises an uncomfortable question. If freedom is still possible here, what does a life sentence truly represent? When a man leaves Angola Prison, the sentence does not disappear. It changes form. Freedom after decades of confinement is not a clean break. It is a slow, uncertain transition that follows a lifetime of rules, surveillance, and limitation. The last 24 hours inside Angola man the gate, but their impact stretches far beyond it. Every habit learned inside the prison follows the former inmate into the outside world. Angola teaches people how to survive without choice. When freedom returns, choice itself becomes overwhelming. Simple decisions, when to eat, where to go, how to speak, require adjustment. The outside world moves without permission, without count, without warning. For someone shaped by decades of structure, that openness can feel disorienting. This is why many former inmates say the final day inside was not the hardest part. The hardest part begins afterward. Rebuilding identity, relearning trust, accepting a world that continued without them. Time lost inside Angola cannot be recovered, only carried. Yet despite the fear and uncertainty, freedom still matters. Even late, even imperfect, even when it arrives after most of life has already passed. The act of walking out of a place built to hold men forever carries meaning beyond the individual. It represents accountability, correction, and the possibility, however rare, that final judgments can be revisited. Angola's legacy is not defined by the few who leave, but by what their departure reveals. It exposes the weight of life sentences. It highlights the cost of permanence. And it forces a question that extends far beyond one prison. How long should punishment last? And who decide when it ends? For the man who leaves, freedom is not about celebration. It is about responsibility. To live, to adapt, and to carry the memory of those who never walked out. Angola remains behind him, but it does not disappear. It becomes part of who he is. And that is the final truth of the last 24 hours before freedom. They are not the end of a story. They are the beginning of one that must be lived without walls. For most men sent to Angola Prison, the gate is not something they ever expect to see from the outside. Angola was built on certainty. Certainty that sentences would not end, that time would not be reversed, and that the men inside would remain there until life itself ran out. That is what makes the last 24 hours before freedom so powerful. They are not dramatic because of celebration. They are powerful because they are rare, because they challenge a system designed around permanence, because they remind us that even the most final decisions are still made by people, and people can be wrong or change or choose mercy. For the man who leaves, freedom does not erase the past. It does not restore lost years or heal every wound. What it offers instead is responsibility. The responsibility to live with what was done, what was endured, and what was survived. Angola may no longer surround him, but it remains part of his identity, shaping how he sees the world and his place in it. For those still inside, each rare release carries a different meaning. It is proof that the gate is real, but also a reminder that it will not open for everyone. Angola continues to stand as a symbol of how far punishment can go, and how long society is willing to make it last. The last 24 hours before freedom are not about walking out. They are about understanding what it means to be allowed back in. Because when a prison built to hold men forever finally lets one go, it forces a question that reaches far beyond its walls. How do we measure justice? And when, if ever, does a sentence truly end? Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe.